starving them to death.
Blockades are
you want them starved to death?
Are a normal part of war.
So starvation is a normal part of war. No, it's a war crime. I'm glad you brought up Nazi Germany. That's exactly what the Germans would have done. Cut off their food, and then incinerate their kids. Because that's what they did. They put them in and incinerated the Jews during the Holocaust. It was heartbreaking. Jews have suffered so much throughout history. Now, Israel turns around, pretends to be the Jewish state, and says, I speak for all Jews. No, you don't. You don't speak for my Jewish friends. You don't speak for my Jewish family. And you've actually greatly tainted them. And I despise Israel for that. Now Israel says, we get to starve children to death. We get to burn them to death. We get to crush their skulls. No, you have become what you...
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Throughout this interview, Piers Morgan repeatedly tried to get Nardeen to answer one question. Do you condemn Hamas? She refused to give the response he was looking for, not because she supports terrorism, but because she recognized the question for what she believed it was, a trap. Say yes, and decades of occupation vanish from the conversation. Say no, and you're immediately labeled a sympathizer, ending the discussion. Instead, Nardeen redirected the focus. Do you condemn the Hannibal Directive? Do you condemn the deaths of 14,500 children? Do you condemn cutting off electricity? Piers didn't directly address those questions. That imbalance may be the most revealing part of the entire interview. Hit the like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for the full breakdown coming up.
But I support all people who are oppressed to resist their oppression. You can't tell people that they don't have the right to defend themselves.
Right, but you do accept if you're not prepared to condemn a group like Hamas, then you are de facto supporting them.
I'm not going to condemn anybody who's defending themselves, and I won't condemn my people who are the victims of this.
Hang on. You guys condemn Israel?
Hang on.
So you condemn the terrorist state of Israel?
Hang on, Nardeen. So did you condemn what they did on October the 7th?
Again, I think a lot of what we saw about October the 7th was actually lies, and they've been disproven.
Wow.
So, I don't know what conversation we're having here. They are. The 40 beheaded babies' lies was disproven. The
do you think the 1,200 people? Okay, well, let me be specific to you. Do you think? Let me be specific with my question.
We've seen Palestinians raped.
Hang on.
That's what I condemn.
Do you believe that 3,000?
Do you condemn Israel?
Can I ask you a question, please? Let me ask you a question and respond. That's how this works. Do you believe that 3,000 Hamas terrorists crossed the border on October the 7th in 3 different phases and attacked indiscriminately any Israelis, in particular Jewish Israelis, they could get their hands on, that they murdered 1,200 people, that they wounded, some of them irreparably in terms of injuries that will never be recovered from, nearly 7,000 more people, that they captured and kidnapped 250-odd people, including a baby, including Holocaust survivors. So do you accept those basic facts?
I mean, the U.S. government is currently negotiating, the continuous ceasefire with Hamas. And so it's clear that,
I'm just asking if you accept those
actions
facts.
were taken.
Nardeen, I just asked you if you accept those facts.
Like I said, it's clear whatever actions they've taken, and I'm not sure, what part of all of that is or isn't true. There's been a lot of propaganda, but it's clear that that was a response to oppression since 1948, to when Israeli groups, Zionist groups went to Palestinian villages like mine.
So just to be clear, you don't condemn
even worse than that.
So you cannot condemn what they did that day.
Like I said, I can't condemn what has been repeatedly
we've heard you loud and
put
clear.
in the media.
We've heard you loud and clear.
What I don't know is true. What I don't know to be true.
I know.
I don't
How very
condemn
convenient that you don't think any of it's true. I mean, we literally saw what they did through their own GoPro videos that they beamed to the world of them murdering innocent people. They literally beamed it in real time
Israel actually
to
killed
the world.
A lot of their
they
people
wanted
through
us
the
to see
Hannibal
it.
Directive.
They were proud of it.
Do you condemn the Hannibal Directive that was directed towards their own people? If Israel cared about their hostages so much, why do they continuously bomb Gaza while they're there?
Right, Winston,
I believe a lot of what we saw on October 7th actually came from the Israeli side.
Okay, Winston, the Hannibal Directive is a perfectly valid point that it does appear that certain leaders on the Israeli side are now conceding there was a Hannibal Directive, which is that they would basically stop their own people from being kidnapped, and if it meant taking their lives in that eventuality, that would have to happen. And there is some evidence that may have happened with some of the people who were killed. So let's be clear, right? I try and be very fair-minded about this. I go where the facts take us. The 40 beheaded babies turned out not to be true. It was stated as fact by an Israeli member of the Israeli forces. It turned out to be untrue. It is true, however, that some people were beheaded. It is true that babies were kidnapped. So these things are all a question of scale. I am very happy to condemn all of it because it was all a despicable act of terrorism. Winston, when you hear someone like Nardeen, who is defending this guy's right to be in America, when you see her so, in my opinion, people can have their own view about the way she's responded, but so glibly brush off what Hamas did that day. This has always been my problem with this debate. If you just cannot find it in yourself, Cenk, if I asked him, would condemn what happened that day, because he has done repeatedly. And then you can have a rational conversation. If you can't condemn it and you put it all down as some form of resistance or opposition, you lose me. Winston.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know really what to respond to that. It's clear what happened on October 7th. And from what little research I've done into Nadine's work, she seems to have supported what happened on October 7th. It's not that she's not even condemning.
You know, there's not just one day in the world, right? I mean, so you guys keep talking about October 7th.
You would condemn what happened, right?
Yeah, of course. But do you guys condemn the 58-year brutal occupation of the Israelis, butchering, slaughtering, oppressing the Palestinians? Do you condemn that they've killed 14,500 children, 4,350 children under the age of 5, 800 babies under the age of 1? They've incinerated them alive. So how can you now be honest and fair and say that Israel is clearly a terrorist state?
I will be honest and fair. I think that Israel's right to self-defense has now gone too far. I've been saying this for months. I think they have killed too many innocent civilians. They keep saying that they have. Proportionally, it's been better than any other modern urban warfare, to which I respond, actually, there is a massively disproportionate number of children, i.e. under 18s in Gaza. Half the population of 2 million is under 18. What I won't do is say that they didn't have a fundamental right/duty to defend their people after the appalling atrocities of October the 7th. Because Hamas has said they're going to carry on doing it. Because Hamas's official spokesman said we're going to do this again and again and again.
Years, then do the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? You say Israel does. When Hamas, in their mind, defends the Palestinians, you say they're no good terrorists. If anybody ever says a kind word about them, they should be arrested and deported.
I think the honest answer...
But when Israel does 400 times worse than Hamas, they've gone too far. I wouldn't call them terrorists. You're allowed to support them and their terrorism.
Well, in the 75 years or so of this conflict, right, there have been 5 flare-ups of war that people accept were flare-ups of war. It would be hard to argue they haven't all been orchestrated by the Palestinian side. Would you accept that? In other words, the actual flare-ups of war...
No, I don't accept that at all.
You don't accept that?
No,
you don't accept that Palestinians or pro-Palestinian groups or Arab groups have actually been responsible for the outbreaks of warfare?
No, I don't accept that 1%.
Okay. Well,
so first of all, if I occupy you in a prison for 58 years and you try to break out 5 times, I wouldn't blame you for it.
Well,
but even so, no. So Israel, for example, on October 7th, we know that they had the intelligence on October 7th, the greatest intelligence agency in the whole world. And then, so why did they let it happen?
Spectacular failure. I agree.
No, it's not. It was a spectacular success for their mission to grab Gaza and the West Bank.
That's nonsense.
Nonsense, my ass.
That's conspiracy
what are they doing now?
Bullshit.
So, Piers, will you admit that once they try to push the Palestinians out and take Gaza for themselves, that it was never about self-defense? It was always about stealing Palestinian land, which is what they have done over and over and over again since 1948.
Yeah, the idea that the Israelis knew what was going... Hang on. Sorry, just to respond to that. The idea that the Israelis knew that October 7th was going to happen and deliberately allowed it to happen to their own people is preposterous.
Some people in the Israeli government who are literally terrorists, like Ben Gvir, absolutely. Netanyahu, I think, is literally the largest terrorist in the world right now. You're telling me Netanyahu wouldn't do that? What? Netanyahu lied us into the Iraq war. He talked about weapons of mass destruction. He talked about how they did 9/11 when, in fact, Saddam Hussein was opposed to al-Qaeda. So that giant liar that lied America into the Iraq war as part of the neocons wouldn't lie to his own people to protect himself from corruption charges, from protecting himself from a very, very unpopular leadership.
Well,
no, and to be able to have an excuse to steal more Palestinian land. That is exactly what Netanyahu has done.
Let me ask. Hang on, Nardeen. I'll come back.
They should know that oppressing Palestinians would result in people defending themselves. They should know that. And I've said this on your show before. As long as there is oppression, there is going to be Palestinian resistance to it. As long as there's an occupation, apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, Palestinians are going to take whatever means they have to defend themselves. We don't have an army because we don't have a state, because the U.S. and Israel continuously blocks that from happening. So yes, when Palestinian militias come together to defend themselves, they're going to be considered terrorist organizations because there is no means for us to be able to lawfully do that, which is exactly the situation that they created. So yes, they are going to expect that it's going to happen, whether they have the intelligence or not. But I do know that they had the intelligence. We do believe they had the intelligence to know that an attack like October 7th was imminent and that Palestinians are going to continue to resist regardless.
Okay, Winston.
That's in the Israeli papers. It's
all right.
Knowledge.
Yeah, Winston, final word to you here. And I would just ask you a difficult question, I guess, which is, there are many people who are absolutely of the view that Israel should continue until the last Hamas terrorist is gone. Many in Israel feel that. They're not as keen on Netanyahu, for example, but they're absolutely keen on the mission to get rid of Hamas. And the trauma that Israel suffered that day cannot be underestimated. However, if you look at the conflict in totality, it is hard to argue, particularly in light of events this week, where Israel has just casually turned off the power into Gaza, which made me ask some questions on X. Well, hang on, who gives them the right to have that right to turn the power on and off into Gaza? And it turns out that they control more than 50% of all the electricity that Gaza has, and turned off 90% of that almost immediately after October the 7th. So you've got these, look, there are guilty Hamas terrorists there. There are also many, many hundreds of thousands of perfectly innocent, particularly children, living there who have had almost no power now, are now getting no fuel coming in. There have been limitations on water. The power that was coming in was being used to provide clean water. That's now been withdrawn. None of this strikes me as being a reasonable thing for Israel to be doing now. Does it you?
Okay, so I think to understand the electricity thing, there's a bit of background needs to be understood. Firstly, why is it that Gaza doesn't have more power plants? One of the reasons is that they have spent many billions of their donations building up a vast terror network.
That is true.
Yeah, and their own military. Another question, which why is it that Egypt aren't supplying electricity to Gaza? The reason is even Egypt themselves recognize Hamas as a Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organization, and they are incredibly wary of that organization. Then, as well as understanding that, you've got to understand the ceasefire negotiations that have broken down.
So but Winston, do you accept any criticism of what Israel is doing now?
I think that they are back in conflict because ceasefire has failed. Both sides. Now, look, if you go into why the ceasefire has failed,
Israel.
There's arguments on both sides. Israel obviously only got 22 of the promised 33 hostages. Hamas said they would clear the Fidelfi passage.
Israel
they did not.
Withdraw
Israel definitely have grievances.
When they try to take Gaza?
May I? Israel have grievances about the phase 1 of the ceasefire failing, so they've been unable to get to phase 2 of the ceasefire.
Hang on, Winston, should they be turning off the power into Gaza?
Now that the ceasefire has failed, the conflict is been.
Yeah, but
they're starving them to death.
Blockades are a normal part of war.
So starvation is a normal part of war. No, it's a war crime. I'm glad you brought up Nazi Germany. That's exactly what the Germans would have done. Cut off their food, and incinerate their kids. Because that's what they did. They put them in and incinerated the Jews during the Holocaust. It was heartbreaking. Jews have suffered so much throughout history. Now, Israel turns around, pretends to be the Jewish state, and says, I speak for all Jews. No, you don't. You don't speak for my Jewish friends. You don't speak for my Jewish family. And you've actually greatly tainted them. And I despise Israel for that. Now Israel says, we get to starve children to death. We get to burn them to death. We get to crush their skulls. No, you have become what you most despised. So please stop. I know that there's nothing we could do because you bought every single politician in America, but I'm asking you to have morality and remember your Jewish faith, which is a wonderful faith that is giving and generous and talks in Passover about even having mercy for the people who kept you as slaves? Can you not have mercy for the people that you are keeping as slaves?
Okay.
How long are you going to occupy them?
Okay.
Answer that question. How long are you going to occupy them? You're brutalizing them. 58 years. You've kept them in a dark dungeon. And anytime they dare to oppose you, you cut off their water, you cut off, and you kill their children. Israel.
Please like, subscribe, and share. The question, do you condemn Hamas, should be called what many critics believe it actually is. Not a journalistic inquiry, but a loyalty test with only one acceptable answer. The argument is that the question is framed so that decades of occupation, thousands of dead children, the blockade, and land confiscation all vanish from the discussion the moment you answer yes. Answer no, and you're instantly labeled a terrorist apologist, ending the conversation before it begins. Nayan rejected that framework and turned the question back around. Piers did not pursue those questions with the same intensity he brought to his own. Do you condemn the deaths of civilians? For many viewers, that imbalance was the central issue. Do you condemn cutting electricity to millions of people? The discussion around the Hannibal Directive remains one of the most debated and least discussed aspects of October 7th. It refers to a documented Israeli military protocol aimed at preventing the capture of soldiers, even when doing so could endanger those soldiers' lives. Reports in Israeli media have discussed allegations that the directive may have been invoked on October 7th, including claims involving attacks on vehicles carrying both militants and Israeli hostages. Piers acknowledged reports suggesting Israeli civilian deaths may have resulted, but the discussion quickly moved on without the same level of scrutiny applied elsewhere. That contrast was visible in real time. The exchange over electricity may have been the closest moment to a deeper reckoning before the conversation shifted. Piers noted that Israel supplied a significant portion of Gaza's electricity and that most of that supply was cut after October 7th. He also acknowledged that the loss of power affected clean water access for millions of civilians, including large numbers of children. When he asked whether that response was justified, the discussion turned instead to Hamas's tunnel infrastructure, and the subject moved on. Under international humanitarian law, the protection of civilian survival infrastructure is a serious legal issue and remains the subject of ongoing international debate and investigation. This is not simply a matter of opinion, but a question addressed by established legal frameworks. The broader point raised was this. Piers asked Nayan to condemn Hamas repeatedly, pressing the issue multiple times and challenging her responses. Questions about civilian suffering and collective punishment, however, received far less sustained attention. One side faced repeated demands for a declaration of loyalty, the other encountered a single question and a change of subject. Critics argue that this is not balance, but an imbalance in how accountability is applied. Nayan recognized that dynamic and refused to accept the framing from the beginning of the interview to the end. If you found this analysis valuable, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and come back for the next breakdown. On this channel, we focus on documented evidence, examine the numbers, and confront uncomfortable facts rather than looking away from them.